Honestly, I'm just so exhausted by petty neighborhood tyrants waving around those laminated pink slips like they're handing down sacred commandments from the mountaintop. I mean, it's literally the whole reason sovereign justice exists, because people like Brenda just can't let a guy exist in peace without turning it into a federal case. Let's just dive into it. What is the going rate for parking a bicycle in your own driveway? In my neighborhood, tucked away in the aggressively caffeinated, perpetually damp suburbs of Portland, Oregon, it's $50. Now, what is the going rate for absolute soul-crushing, legally bulletproof revenge? I'd say it's about $2,000 in scrap metal, a few cases of cheap beer, and a deep, obsessive dive into a federal copyright loophole. It was July 24th, 2023. A Tuesday. I had just gotten back from a brutal, muddy, utterly glorious 3-hour trail ride out near Powell Butte. My calves were screaming, my lungs felt like they were filled with wet sand, and my mountain bike, a heavy matte green Trek that I loved more than most of my extended family, was caked in a thick crust of Oregon clay. I was exhausted. I propped the bike up against the side of my own garage, right next to the recycling bin, with the full intention of hosing it down once I stopped sweating profusely. I went inside. I took a shower. I made a turkey sandwich. I sat on my couch and stared blankly at the wall for exactly 2 hours. When I finally dragged myself back outside, the mud on the bike was starting to dry. But that wasn't the only thing resting on my property. Tucked neatly beneath the rubber grip of my left handlebar was a bright, aggressively fluorescent pink slip of paper. It was laminated. Who laminates a parking ticket for a driveway? Brenda, that's who. I looked down the street and saw her. Brenda was the president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. She was a woman who treated a tape measure and a clipboard like weapons of mass destruction. She wore pastel tracksuits that made a swishing sound when she walked, and she had a bob haircut that looked like it had been carved out of a solid block of granite. She was currently measuring the height of a neighbor's hydrangeas with a laser level. "Hey, Brenda!" I yelled, jogging down the driveway, the pink slip flapping in my hand. She turned slowly. She didn't blink, she just adjusted her transition lenses. "Good afternoon, I see you found your notice. Brenda, this is a $50 fine for an unsecured recreational wheeled vehicle. The tires are literally still wet. I was just about to wash it. Article 4, Section B." Brenda recited, her voice a monotone drone of bureaucratic joy. "No visible storage of recreational wheeled vehicles in front yards, driveways, or unapproved side yards. A rule is a rule? We have standards in Whispering Pines." "It's not stored," I argued, gesturing wildly to the dripping mud. "It's resting. For like an hour." "A fine is a fine," she said, tapping her pen against her clipboard. "Pay it within 14 days, or we compound the interest. 30 days, we put a lien on your house. Have a blessed day." She swished away. I stood there, clutching the pink slip, feeling a very specific, very dangerous type of heat rising in my chest. I paid the $50 that night. I figured, fine, I'll eat the cost. It's not worth a war, but Brenda didn't stop. The $50 wasn't a deterrent. It was blood in the water. Over the next 3 weeks, she went on an absolute crusade. My roommate, Dave, left his commuter bike on the porch while he ran inside to grab his wallet. Boom, pink slip, $50. My buddy came over for a barbecue and locked his 10-speed to the heavy iron handrail of my front steps. Boom, pink slip, $50. She was lurking. She was watching from behind her custom plantation shutters, waiting for the exact moment a rubber tire touched my concrete driveway. By mid-August, my household had racked up $250 in fines. The injustice didn't just burn, it became an obsession. I wasn't sleeping. I was pacing my living room at 3 a.m., muttering to myself about property rights. I needed a weapon. I needed a loophole. I started where every good campaign of malicious compliance begins, the enemy's own playbook. I downloaded the 84-page PDF of the Whispering Pines covenants, conditions, and restrictions. I drank a pot of black coffee and read the entire thing, front to back, twice. Signage I highlighted, I bookmarked, I searched for keywords. Article 4, Section B was incredibly specific. It banned unsecured bicycles, stored bicycles, scooters, skateboards, and any wheeled apparatus designed for human transport from being visible from the street. The HOA had ironclad authority to fine, remove, or penalize anyone treating their front lawn like a bike rack. But what didn't they ban? I flipped to the section on landscaping and exterior modifications. There were strict rules about paint colors, only earth tones, grass height, no more than 3 inches, and fencing, cedar only. But there was absolutely zero mention of art. Portland is a weird city. It prides itself on being weird. And because of that, the municipal zoning codes have massive sweeping protections for independent artists and private installations. As when I spent 3 days deep in the city's zoning ordinances. I found out that as long as a structure isn't habitable, doesn't block a public right-of-way, and is under 20 feet tall, it doesn't require a commercial structural permit. But local ordinances weren't enough. Brenda had an HOA lawyer on retainer. She could still argue it was a nuisance or an eyesore. I needed the nuclear option. I needed the federal government. That's when I found the holy grail of legal revenge. VARA, the Visual Artists' Rights Act of 1990. I was sitting in my kitchen eating cold pizza when I stumbled across a Cornell Law School summary of 17 U.S. Code Section 106A. I nearly choked on a pepperoni. VARA is a federal copyright law that grants artists moral rights to their work. Specifically, it protects works of visual art from intentional distortion, mutilation, or modification. If a piece of art is of recognized stature and someone destroys it, they aren't just committing vandalism, they are committing a federal copyright violation subject to statutory damages that can reach up to $150,000. My mind started racing. The HOA banned bicycles. But what is a bicycle? Legally speaking, it's a vehicle, a tool for transportation. But what happens if you strip it of its function? What happens if you take 50 bicycles, render them completely unrideable, and weld them together into a monolithic structure? They cease to be vehicles. They become a medium. They become sculpture. The strategy was set. If I built a massive, immovable sculpture out of bicycles, and the HOA tried to tear it down or fine me for storing vehicles, they would be stepping directly into a federal copyright trap. I wasn't going to just park a bike on my lawn. I was going to build a monument to spite. On September 2nd, the sourcing began. I hit up Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, and every junkyard within a 50-mile radius of Portland. I became a scavenger. I wasn't looking for good bikes. I was looking for trash. I bought rusted-out Schwinn's from the 1980s. I bought bent fixed-gear frames that had been wrapped around telephone poles. I went to local bike co-ops and offered to buy their scrap metal bins. I was paying $3, $5, maybe $10 a frame. Within 2 weeks, my backyard looked like a bicycle graveyard. I had exactly 50 frames, hundreds of twisted spokes, and a mountain of greasy chains. But I had a problem. I am a lot of things, a petty man, a stubborn man, a man who reads HOA bylaws for fun, but I am not a welder. I didn't know the first thing about structural integrity or metallurgy. If I was going to build a 20-foot-tall middle finger, it couldn't fall over and crush the mailman. That would defeat the purpose and probably land me in actual, non-fun jail. I needed a professional. Enter Mad Max Mike. I found Mike's business card pinned to a corkboard in a dive bar in North Portland. The card was made of a piece of actual sheet metal, with his name and number acid etched into it. It simply read, Mike, I weld things. Don't ask stupid questions. I called him. We met in my backyard the next day. Mike was a massive guy, covered neck to chin in faded traditional tattoos. He was wearing heavy leather work boots, dirty denim overalls, and he had a lit cigarette permanently dangling from the corner of his mouth. He walked around the pile of 50 rusted bicycles, kicking a few tires, his expression completely unreadable. So, Mike said, his voice sounding like gravel in a blender. You want a bike rack? No, Mike, I said, handing him a cold beer. I want a monument. I want the Iron Throne of Westeros, but made entirely of rusty Schwinn's and fixed-gear frames. I want it to be aggressive. I want it to block out the sun, and it needs to be exactly 19.5 feet tall. Mike stopped. He took the beer, cracked it open, and took a long sip. He stared at me for a very long moment, the cherry of his cigarette glowing bright red. 19.5 feet, Mike repeated slowly. Portland zoning allows private art under 20 feet without a commercial structural permit, I explained. And the base needs to be bolted to a reinforced concrete pad. It has to be legally immovable. It has to be permanent. Mike looked from me to the pile of bikes and then over the cedar fence toward Brenda's immaculate hydrangea-lined property. A slow, terrifying grin spread across his face. I charge double for spite, Mike said, crushing the empty beer can in his bare hand. When do we start? We spent the next 3 days drafting the blueprint. This wasn't just a haphazard pile of garbage. This was going to be an engineering marvel. Mike insisted on building a central spine out of half-inch heavy-duty steel pipe that would be anchored deep into the ground. The bicycles would be welded to the spine, radiating outward, us creating a massive, terrifying spire of gears, handlebars, and metal tubing. First, we had to pour the foundation. On a crisp Thursday morning, a small cement mixer backed into my driveway. We dug a 4-foot hole dead center in my front lawn, exactly 3 feet back from the sidewalk, adhering strictly to city property line codes, and filled it with 3,000 pounds of high-strength concrete, setting massive industrial anchor bolts into the wet cement. When the concrete cured, the real chaos began. Mike arrived on Monday morning with a flatbed truck carrying a heavy-duty MIG welder, an acetylene torch, and a massive portable generator. He set up shop right in the middle of the lawn. For the next 5 days, my property became an industrial war zone. The sensory overload was incredible. From 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., the neighborhood echoed with the ear-splitting shriek of angle grinders slicing through metal frames. The air smelled thickly of ozone, melting rubber, and burning grease. Brilliant, blinding flashes of blue and white light from the arc welder strobed across the front of my house, casting long, jagged shadows down the street. The neighborhood reaction was exactly what you would expect. People driving by would slow down to a crawl, staring in open-mouthed confusion. My next-door neighbor, a sweet older guy named Gary, brought out a lawn chair and a thermos of coffee just to watch the spectacle. But others weren't so thrilled. I could see the blinds twitching in the houses across the street. By Wednesday, the throne was 10 feet tall and growing. It was a chaotic, beautiful mess. Mountain bike frames formed the wide base, while sleek road bike forks spiraled upward like twisted vines. It looked like a post-apocalyptic Christmas tree. That afternoon, I was helping Mike hoist a particularly heavy tandem bike frame up to the second tier when a white Ford Explorer with the Whispering Pines HOA logo on the door screeched to a halt at the curb. Brenda threw the car into park and practically sprinted across my grass, her face the color of a ripe tomato. "What in the name of God are you doing?" she shrieked, her voice cutting through the noise of the generator. Mike didn't even look down. He just pulled his welding mask over his face and struck an arc, sending a shower of bright orange sparks cascading down toward Brenda's pristine white sneakers. She jumped back with a yelp. "Good afternoon, Brenda," I yelled cheerfully. I'm leaning against the steel spine of the sculpture. "Just doing some landscaping." "This is an illegal junkyard," she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at the monstrosity. "You are violating Article 4. You are storing vehicles on your lawn. I am calling the police." "Go right ahead," I smiled. 20 minutes later, a Portland Police Department cruiser rolled up. 2 officers stepped out, looking incredibly confused. They approached the edge of the lawn, keeping a safe distance from Mike, who was currently using a blowtorch to melt a plastic seat off a frame. "Son," the older officer said, hooking his thumbs into his duty belt, "what exactly is happening here? Dispatch said you were operating an unlicensed commercial scrapyard and endangering the public." "Good afternoon, officer," I said, by walking over with a perfectly organized manila folder. "Absolutely not. I am commissioning a piece of private residential art. Here is my city property line survey, showing we are well within my legal boundary. Here is my signed contract with a licensed metal fabricator. And here is a copy of the city zoning code highlighting the exemption for non-habitable artistic structures under 20 feet. The officer took the folder. He looked at the paperwork. He looked at the 20-foot tower of rusted bicycles. He looked up at Mike. "It's a metaphor for the crushing weight of suburbia!" Mike roared from the top of the throne, his voice muffled by the welding mask, immediately returning to grinding a piece of steel. The officer sighed heavily, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He had the look of a man who dealt with Portland weirdness entirely too often. "Is it blocking the sidewalk?" the officer asked tiredly. "Nope. 3 feet back. City code," I replied. "Is it structurally sound?" "Anchored in 3,000 pounds of reinforced concrete, sir." The officer handed the folder back to me. He turned to Brenda, who was vibrating with rage on the sidewalk. "Ma'am, it's private property. He's got his paperwork in order. It's a civil matter. Have a nice day." As the cruiser pulled away, I looked at Brenda. She looked at me. The war had officially escalated from a skirmish to a nuclear standoff. By Friday afternoon, the noise finally stopped. The throne was completely assembled, towering over the neighborhood like a jagged metallic middle finger pointing straight at the heavens. Honestly, looking up at it, I was like a little terrified of what we had created. It was 19 feet, 5 inches of pure, aggressive chaos. But Mike wasn't done. He pulled 3 massive spray guns out of his truck and hooked them up to a roaring air compressor. We spent the entire weekend blasting the structure from top to bottom with industrial-grade, rust-resistant matte black paint. It took, literally gallons of the stuff. When it finally dried, it seemed to just absorb the sunlight. It looked like a permanent black hole had opened up right in the middle of my front lawn. It was magnificent. I dragged an aluminum stepladder out of the garage, climbed all the way to the top where Mike had welded a twisted, vaguely seat-shaped contraption out of 3 10-speed frames, and I sat down. I felt like a dark, petty king overlooking my very tiny, very manicured suburban kingdom. That's exactly when the minivan armada arrived. Brenda didn't just come back. She brought the entire HOA board for backup. 3 identical beige minivans aggressively blocked my driveway. Out stepped Brenda, flanked by 4 other people who looked like they were all collectively late for a terrible golf tournament. They marched up to the edge of the grass in a tactical formation, stopping short of my property line, just staring up at the matty black monolith in absolute horror. "Tear this pile of garbage down immediately!" Brenda shrieked. She was literally shaking. The aluminum clipboard was visibly vibrating in her hands. "I guess you don't appreciate modern art, Brenda," I called down from my perch, leaning casually against a protruding set of handlebars. "Oh, you have exactly 24 hours," she screamed, her voice cracking, completely ignoring my tone. "Or we are bringing a bulldozer, tearing this dangerous eyesore down, and billing you for the demolition. You are in direct violation of Article 4. Those are unsecured bicycles." "Actually, Brenda," I yelled back, slowly climbing down the stepladder so I could look her directly in the eye level. "As per Article 4, I am not storing bicycles. These bicycles are permanently immobilized. They are welded together with half-inch structural steel. They no longer possess the mechanical function of a vehicle. Legally speaking, they are a recognized medium of sculpture." One of the board members, a guy in a heavily starched pastel yellow polo shirt, scoffed loudly. "You can't just call a pile of hazardous trash art to get out of a fine." "Oh, son." "I literally can, Bob, or whatever your name is," I said, leaning comfortably against the cold black steel of the base. "Go ahead. Bring a bulldozer. I honestly dare you." They stormed off in a huff, peeling out of the cul-de-sac and leaving black tire marks on the pavement. For a few days, it was quiet. The neighborhood kids started treating the throne like a spooky local landmark, whispering about it when they rode past. People would walk their golden retrievers past my house and just stop and stare, pointing at the massive spires of bike forks. But the silence didn't last. Exactly 1 week later, a thick, terrifyingly official certified letter arrived in my mailbox. It was from a very expensive-looking corporate law firm downtown, representing the Whispering Pines HOA. It was a formal, aggressively worded cease-and-desist, all threatening an immediate lawsuit, a court-ordered injunction for demolition, and foreclosure on my house for unpaid fines and mounting legal fees. Reading it sitting at my kitchen island, my stomach just dropped. Honestly, the anxiety spiked hard. My hands were shaking. Had I pushed it way too far? I was a guy with a welder friend staring down a multi-million-dollar corporate law firm over a pile of painted junk. But then I looked at my notes. I remembered the loophole. I remembered VARA. The court date was set for a rainy Tuesday 2 weeks later. We ended up in county civil court for a preliminary injunction hearing. The HOA wanted the judge to grant them the immediate legal right to bring a demolition crew onto my property without my consent. I walked into the courtroom wearing a slightly wrinkled navy suit, carrying a single, extremely static accordion folder. Brenda and the HOA lawyer, a guy who looked like his briefcase cost more than my entire car, were sitting at the plaintiff's table, looking incredibly smug and relaxed. When the judge called the case, the lawyer stood up and gave this long, drawn-out theatrical speech about property values, community safety standards, and how I was willfully and maliciously defying the established rules I had legally agreed to when I bought the house. When it was my turn, I didn't even bring up the HOA bylaws. I stood up, walked to the podium, arranged my microphone, and looked right at the judge. "Your Honor," I started, trying to sound as calm and collected as possible while my palms were literally sweating through my legal pads. "The HOA is completely 100% correct." The lawyer blinked. Shamati looked totally thrown off. Brenda's jaw actually dropped. "Unsecured bicycles are an absolute eyesore," I continued smoothly. "And if I were storing bicycles on my front lawn, they would have every right to find me. I would pay it happily. But Exhibit A is not a bicycle. It is a registered, original work of visual art, officially titled Pedal to the Metal." I pulled a crisp stack of papers from my accordion folder and handed them to the bailiff, who passed them up to the judge and then over to the opposing counsel. "What you are holding, Your Honor," I said, my confidence suddenly surging back, "is a formal certified appraisal from a recognized independent local art gallery valuing this site-specific installation at exactly $25,000. More importantly, most attached right behind that appraisal is my official federal copyright registration under the Visual Artists' Rights Act of 1990. The HOA lawyer hastily flipped through the papers, his smug, relaxed expression rapidly dissolving into utter panic as his eyes scanned the federal seals. "Under VARA," I said, turning slightly to look directly at Brenda, who was gripping the edge of the table. "Any attempt by the HOA or their hired third-party contractors to bulldoze, dismantle, or maliciously modify this sculpture without my express written consent is a federal offense. It carries statutory damages of up to $150,000 per infraction. So if the HOA is prepared to write that check to me today, right now, they can absolutely bring their bulldozer tomorrow morning." The courtroom went dead silent. The only sound was the heavy rain hitting the tall windows. The judge, a stern woman who looked like she was about 5 minutes away from retiring and had zero patience left for local drama, slowly lowered her reading glasses. She looked at the glossy photograph of the 20-foot black iron throne I had submitted into evidence. She looked at the federal copyright paperwork. Then she looked slowly over at Brenda, whose face had gone from cherry red to an alarming, sickly shade of pale gray. "Counselor," the judge said softly, addressing the sweating HOA lawyer, "is your client prepared to assume financial liability for a willful federal copyright violation in order to remove this structure?" The lawyer leaned over and frantically whispered into Brenda's ear. Brenda started aggressively, violently shaking her head no, looking like she was going to throw up. "Your Honor," the lawyer stammered, awkwardly packing his expensive pens back into his briefcase. The board, we withdraw our request for an injunction at this time." "Injunction dismissed." The judge banged her heavy wooden gavel, a tiny, almost imperceptible smirk playing on her lips. "Case closed. Get out of my courtroom." Walking out of that courthouse into the Portland rain felt like floating. It was total, undeniable, overwhelming victory. And the aftermath was somehow even sweeter than the verdict. The Iron Throne of Whispering Pines became an absolute legend in the Tri-County area. The local independent newspaper did a massive front-page feature on it. People started driving from across town, parking down the street just to walk up and take selfies in front of it. And the absolute best part? The HOA couldn't touch it. They couldn't issue a single fine for it. They couldn't even look at it too hard without risking a massive federal lawsuit. Brenda officially resigned from the HOA board in complete disgrace about a month later. Apparently, the rest of the neighborhood held a massive emergency meeting when they realized she had blown almost $10,000 of their communal reserve funds on emergency lawyer fees just to lose a fight against a pile of scrap metal and a federal copyright loophole. They practically chased her out of the clubhouse. So here I am. I'm literally sitting on the throne right now, the cold metal pressing into my back, wearing a heavy crown mic welded for me out of old greasy bike chains. Honestly, but it's surprisingly comfortable once you find the right angle between the sprockets. The moral of the story? The next time some petty tyrant with a laminated clipboard tells you to move your bike, maybe you shouldn't. Maybe you should just buy 49 more, weld them together, bolt them to the earth, and call it a masterpiece. Stay petty, stay legal, and I'll see you in the next episode of Sovereign Justice.